We are broadcasting live. I'm trying to get us on the YouTube stream.
So while you're doing that, I'm just going to call the meeting. So this meeting of the Berkeley Police
Sure.
Accountability Board is now called to order. My name is Izzy Ramsey. I'm the chairperson of the board. Today's date is October 27, 2020.
We are broadcasting live. I'm trying to get us on the YouTube stream.
So
Okay.
while you're doing that, I'm just going to call the meeting. So this meeting of the Berkeley Police Accountability Board is now called to order. My name is Izzy Ramsey. I'm the chairperson of the board. Today's date is October 27, 2020.
We are broadcasting.
Okay, are we ready to proceed?
I believe I turned off the live stream. I just don't know what.
Okay. All right. Today's date is October 27, 2021, and the time is 7:01 p.m. Pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order N-2920 issued by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, and to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that could spread the COVID-19 virus, this meeting of the City of Berkeley Police Accountability Board will be conducted exclusively through teleconference and Zoom video conference, and there will not be a physical meeting location available. If you have accessed this meeting remotely and do not wish for your name to appear on the screen, use the drop-down menu and click on Rename to rename yourself to be anonymous. To request to speak, use the raise hand icon on the screen. If you have joined by phone and wish to comment during the public comment portion of the agenda, press *9 and wait to be recognized. Could you please call the roll?
Yes. Calavita?
Here.
Chang?
Here.
Harris?
Here.
Leftwich? I didn't hear any.
Here.
Thank you. Levine?
Here.
Mizell? I don't see Mizell. Moore?
Here.
Owens?
Here.
And Ramsey.
Here.
Okay, we have quorum, Chair.
Thanks. Present from the Berkeley Police Department. I see we have Lieutenant Rittenhouse. We also have present from the City Attorney's Office, Deputy City Attorney Samuel Harvey. I'm not seeing any member from the BPA or other members of the police department. Also present is Catherine Lee, who's the interim director of police accountability. And I don't believe Mr. Norris is present today. So the next order of business is approving the agenda.
Chair,
So there's a couple of recommended changes from the director. You want to just state those?
yes. Could we please postpone agenda items 9E and 11? Not quite ready to present on 9E. I still need to have a discussion with the police department before I bring more information back to the board. That's the policy complaint.
Okay.
For number 11, that's the first closed session item. We do not yet have we haven't settled the body worn camera access issue yet. So,
Okay. So that would be recommend that we postpone those items till the next meeting. Are there any other recommended changes and a motion to approve the agenda? I'd also note that board member Mizell is now present.
thank you.
Any other recommended changes to the agenda? Okay, is there a motion to approve it with Director Lee's recommendations?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Director Chang and seconded by Director Leftwich. Any objection? All right, neither seeing nor hearing any. That'll be approved by unanimous consent. We will now move to public comment. Let me see if there are any raised hands from attendees. Looks like we have at least one. So I will share screen for the timer. Okay, this is 3 minutes per speaker. So right now we have one hand up, and the first is Charles Clark. You are now allowed to speak.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Director, and members of the board, I am Charles Clark, a resident of District 6, and I have two observations on tonight's agenda. First, item 9C on conflicts of interest by the city attorney. When the charter amendment was being drafted, this issue was discussed at length, and the end result was that the language voters approved in section 15B of Measure II, which specified, quote, a prohibited conflict of interest under the California rules of professional conduct with regard to a specified manner, unquote. So outside legal counsel would be retained, quote, when the city attorney has determined that a conflict of interest exists, unquote. So we voters enacted a well-defined standard and invested the determination in a specific person, the city attorney, who, by the way, was made a charter officer by another initiative, Measure KK, last November. My observation is that any calls for outside counsel should be evaluated against the standard that we voters approved in Measure II in Section 15B. Second observation, item 10A, involves some kind of revision to the body-worn camera policy, Policy 425. I did take a look at Policy 425 and noticed immediately that in Section 425.18.1 at page 24 of tonight's Packet A, or at page 10 of the published policy, it still refers to the Police Review Commission, the PRC officer, and the PRC investigator, when it should refer to the Police Accountability Board, the Director of Police Accountability, and the DPA investigator. I imagine that sort of pencil slash change will have to be done throughout many Lexipol policies. But the proposal appears to seek broader access to body-worn camera evidence in some unspecified way. I think any proposal should clearly and specifically state what problem the proposal would solve that is not already solved by Section 20 of Measure II, the section where we voters granted the board and the DPA access to city records. I'd like to know if there's a specific example where some problem has already arisen, and if so, then it would be useful to bring that example out. Policy 425 at the paragraph 18.1 that I already mentioned envisions that access to body-worn camera files would be to investigate a specific complaint. If a more free-ranging expedition into those videos is contemplated, then it would be helpful to know the purpose to be served by that expedition. I think the increased access to police records that this board and the director gained through Measure II was the most important part of the charter amendment. But that access must be exercised responsibly. So I look forward to hearing about the problems being solved and the purposes being served by the body-worn camera proposal in item 10A. Thank you.
Okay, I see one other hand that's been raised. That is Kit Saganor. Let's make sure yes, so you have permission to speak.
Thank you very much. I look forward to the day when these meetings are in person so I can actually see the people that I'm talking to. It's very difficult to actually talk against a blank screen like this. I want to apologize for my comments at the last meeting of the PAB at the end of the meeting for public comment. I impugned the good work of Sam Harvey, and I was very, very wrong to do so. My frustrations and disappointments are not with Mr. Harvey as personally, they are with the Berkeley City government as a whole. I feel that there are many things that the city government sets out saying it wants to do, and yet manages to go around in circles and not actually do them for a very long time. As one example, which I think the PAB will be taking up tonight, last January, a decision was made that the police, when searching someone, getting somebody's permission to be voluntarily searched, would give that person a written form where they could record, yes, that they have volunteered or they're willing to be searched. And apparently that short form, which I really can't see why it couldn't have been written in a week, a few weeks, a month, to make sure that everyone took a look at it and figured out if it would work. And apparently that form is still being worked on. And to me, it's foot dragging. That's how it comes across. I'm sorry to feel that way about the Berkeley city government. I would really like to feel that folks are doing things as expeditiously as they can. I certainly understand that you cannot turn a large organization on a dime, and these things take time. But there are other things that get done very quickly. And so there's a pattern. And at some point, I have to believe that all of the slowness and all of the delays are not really accidental. And that's very disappointing. Thank you, the Police Accountability Board, for doing everything you can to make the changes happen that really need to happen for the good of the entire community in Berkeley. Thank you so much.
I'm not seeing any additional raised hands, so if anyone else would like to speak, now would be the opportunity to use the raise hand icon, or if you're calling in, use *9. Oh, one more. So George Littman is next. I did just wanted to note for the public, you may have to fiddle with the Zoom controls, but there is a way to view the panelist in a floating window while you have share screen. So you just have to choose the particular view option. So, okay, this is George Littman is allowed to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond briefly to the mentioned by Mr. Clark of the conflict of interest procedures. On the non-legal level, I think it's a problem. It's a structural, not an institutional, and not personal conflict. And I think this is what Ms. Aguilar was saying. These are not personal issues. It's an institutional conflict when the body, the group in the city that is responsible for defending the city from lawsuits also has to give advice over the powers of the PAB. Now, the way I read, as a non-lawyer, but the way I read the charter is it says, this shall be done. That is, the board may seek outside counsel when the city attorney says they have a conflict of interest. On one hand, it's very strange to us in the lay world that only the individual who has the conflict of interest make any determination about that. But the interesting thing about the language is that it does not say, and no one else. There is no other way to achieve, and to me, that doesn't bar the city council from saying, okay, well, in addition, we're going to determine that it would be best for you to have outside counsel in this case. So I would just suggest to the lawyers and others involved, please take a look at that language and consider, isn't it not in the best interest of the board to be able to arrange for outside counsel in a case where there is a critical conflict of interest on an institutional basis. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any other raised hands. I'll give opportunity for people to use the raise hand icon if they'd like to speak, or if you're on the phone to hit *9. *9. All right, going once, going twice. Sold. All right, thank you. So thank you for the public comment. Next on the agenda is the approval of minutes. Are there any corrections or comments to the October 13th minutes that have been proposed?
Just to remind everybody, those were emailed Friday to the board members. They're not in the packet, and they do appear as supplemental materials on the board's agenda webpage.
Okay, has everyone had an opportunity to review those? Or would people like to push that to the end of the agenda? Okay, looks like, then is there a motion to, if there are no corrections, is there a motion to approve the minutes from
So
October
moved.
13th? Okay, that's moved by Board Member Leftwich. Is there a second?
Second. I second.
I'm sorry, that was
Harris.
Member Harris. Thank you. Sorry, I just turned my eye for a second there. Any objection? Okay, not seeing any objections, that will be approved by unanimous consent. All right, next on the agenda is the chair's report. So I actually don't have a lot to report today beyond where we were. I met with the city attorney and City Attorney Brown about trying to get a closed session and to have their support at these various meetings. So they said that they would attempt to do that. I'm going to leave that to Sam Harvey to discuss later at a later point. And also to address the issue regarding an executive summary. So other than that, I just would recommend everybody sign up for their ride-alongs if you haven't done that yet. And then we're going to continue to try to push through with training. We have a 40-hour training requirement by the end of 6 months. And so we may, I know the director asked whether people would be available for a second meeting in November so that we could try to dedicate it to meeting some of those training requirements. So that is it for me. And we also have an update from Board Member Calavita regarding the police chief search, and then an update from Board Member Mizell on reimagining public safety task force. So Board Member Calavita.
We had a meeting last week. It was our third meeting, the steering committee for the police chief search. And we're at the stage of evaluating recruitment firms for the police search. And that's where we're at. It's going rather slowly, I would say. But yeah.
No, I was just going to say, and please use the raise hand icon if anybody has questions for Board Member Calavita. Okay, thanks. Board Member Mizell, reimagining public safety task force.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We met actually just earlier tonight, starting at 5 p.m. We met today as a change from our usual schedule of Thursdays at 6 p.m. Our agenda today focused really on how we want to organize the process of responding to Nick Jr.'s draft report, draft final report, which they'll be releasing on Friday. So we've set up some subcommittee assignments there to start reviewing that report. We'll have at least 2 more scheduled meetings. One will be on Thursday, November 18th, and then Thursday, December 2nd, currently scheduled at our usual time of 6 p.m. There we'll really continue breaking down Nick Jr.'s report, adding our feedback and potentially some sort of companion document. So that's all we're discussing right now, and we'll continue working on over the next month.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Board Member Mizell? All right, thank you for those reports. So now as a Director of Police Accountability's report, Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of our cases, we had 1 new complaint filed since your last meeting. We have 2 Coloca cases that are pending. On the first one, the hearing was held, still waiting for the decision to come out. The second one, the hearing was held last Thursday. There was a request by the officer's representative for additional briefings. That was granted. So now I have to file a response this week. Next, at your next meeting, November 10th, will be the first meeting at which I will be bringing to you findings and recommendations on a complaint. So this is, there's now a two-step process. Once the staff's investigation is done, instead of just handing you a report with our investigative materials, you will get I think you will get a lot of the materials, but it will be accompanied by the director's recommended findings on the allegations, as well as if we recommend any sustained findings, then we're to recommend whether discipline should be imposed. So that is coming up, and Investigator Norris and I are working very hard on that. There's a lot to sort out because it's the first one, and there's not a lot of guidance in the charter, but obviously we need to present to you enough information on which you can, make a decision, an informed decision. Then another new aspect under the charter is that Internal Affairs is supposed to, or the department, but it's coming through Internal Affairs, is supposed to send to me a letter of disposition that they send to a complainant who files with IA, but not with the PAB. And the letter tells them that if there are not any sustained findings, that they have the ability to contest the decision or decisions to my office. And so I received the first such letter, I think October 12th. So I think time is still running on that, unless I'm not counting right. It's 20 days from receipt. The chair and I will be participating in a panel with the League of Women Voters, Berkeley, Albany, Emeryville, tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. I sent the board members the link, and members of the public can log on to their website. You do have to, if you want to attend this panel, you need to register beforehand to get the link. So we will be on this panel along with representatives from Albany and Emeryville who are involved in police matters. So it's a panel on police reform in our respective cities. Byron trained 9, which is a lot of people, 9 law students who participate in a Berkeley Law project. This is one of their student-led projects, and where they engage in there's a whole variety of projects that are initiated by the students themselves. And several years ago, a group of students initiated a project where they would represent complainants before the PRC. And so they're continuing to do that. Usually we've had 3 or 4 a semester, and this semester we have 9 of them. So that's good. It's good for our complainants. Just in case I forget to say this later, I want to say this now. I had forgotten that the standing rules do need to go to council for approval. So once you finalize them tonight, I'll be agendizing them for the council. And then I did want to talk about a possible special meeting for November 17th, which I had thrown out there, and I heard from some of you, but not all of you. And then at first I heard that the reimagining meeting would be that night, but Board Member Mizell, did you say it's now the 18th reimagining?
Yes, it's that Thursday that week.
Thursday, the
I believe
18th.
it's the 18th. Yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm still trying to nail down, it takes a lot of coordination. I'm still trying to get commitments from HR and the city attorney's office. And the idea is to have a training on the Myers-Milius-Brown Act, which governs meet and confer, so that everybody can learn in depth what is required. and follow that with the closed session, and hoping that the city attorney does determine that we can have a closed session to talk about the confidential memos. So they would kind of flow naturally, because the first memo that we have received talks in depth about the application of MMBA to the interim regulations that the board had proposed. And then we are still waiting the second memo, and I'm sure we will hear from Mr. Harvey about the timing on that. I also had to throw out there an idea for training on a Saturday, and I got 0 responses, and I know that's no fun, but as Chair Ramsey mentioned, we do have a 40-hour requirement, and you've just had so much business to do in these meetings that there hasn't been a lot of time for the trainings, and a couple have been postponed. I work with Lieutenant Okies, who has coordinated all the BPD trainings, and I have to give him a lot of credit for doing all that. He was ready in July with a whole series of trainings. He said, "Oh, the next one is 2 hours," and I just don't know how we can fit that into a regular meeting. So that's why I had suggested that, and I will be following up on that. And that is my report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Board Member Leftwich.
Yes, I was vis-a-vis the trainings. I'm wondering if any of them are recorded so that board members could just watch them on their own timetable, because it seems really difficult to get everybody together.
Right. Well, no, they're not pre-recorded, if that's the question. If, say, there was a training given at a meeting and you needed to catch up, you could do it that way, but you've all been actually at all the meetings.
So I was wondering if any of them could be pre-recorded, or from the NACO, some of the, or something, just because it seems like a lot of hours for us to get in. It seems quite difficult for us to do that as a group always.
Yes, that's true.
I would also say I would think it would be a good idea to record them, because if there are any new board members who come on in the middle of a term, then they're going to have some ability to get the same training.
Right. That's true. Okay, I'll think about that. The only issue with the pre-recorded ones is you don't have the opportunity for Q&A, but I'm sure we could figure out a way to handle questions, especially if they're in-house, if they're given by BPD or, city attorney's office, city clerk's office, obviously we can reach out to them if you have questions.
Yeah, but maybe we should set the November 17th date, and however many people we have, and then we can record it. And if someone else needs to watch it on another date, they can. We probably would have to have a quorum though to have a meeting, but I'm not sure we have to have a meeting to have training. So, but we can figure that out offline.
That's a good question. You do have to have a quorum to have a meeting.
Yeah, but I think if we don't have a quorum and we have training, we're then not a Brown Act violation because we don't have a quorum.
Right.
So,
Right. So you could still go forward with
Right.
less quorum, and it won't be a meeting.
yeah, but let's figure it out offline. So
Okay.
we can talk about that.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else, Board Member Leftwich? Okay. Board Member Calvita.
Yes, I was wondering, Director Lee, if you could just very briefly tell us when you get something from the IA and the
Yes.
complainant contests their decision, does that
Right.
just become a normal complaint for us?
No, there's a different process that's outlined in the charter for that.
Right, I remember, but I don't
Yeah.
remember exactly what it says.
So what happens is then the director, the charter gives the director the authority to make a decision as to whether or not to request a review. And the review consists of the IA record. So it's not a new investigation. It's simply looking at what IA looked at and their decision. And then if I do determine that there should be a review, then I would convene what I've called in the regulations a review panel of 3 of you to go through that and make a decision.
All right.
Any other questions for the director? Okay, we'll move on to the chief's report. I think Lieutenant Rittenhouse is covering that today. Is that right?
That's correct. Thank you, Chair Ramsey. The chief couldn't be here today, but she did ask me to share some things with you all. She wanted you guys to know that DPD provided our annual crime report to council. It included use of force, stop data, and several other departmental initiatives, including our work on the FIP recommendations. Director Lee should have shared that material with you, all that was submitted by DPD to the council. In terms of cases of interest, recently 2 suspects were arrested in connection to the West Berkeley gun violence. On the morning of October 14th, the detectives conducted several search warrants throughout the Bay Area in connection to a shooting that occurred in the area of 10th Street and Addison Street on September 4th. During the September daytime shooting, several bystanders in the area had to run for cover as suspects fired multiple rounds without regard to anyone else. During the investigation, witness accounts, video surveillance, and automatic license plate readers from other jurisdictions assisted investigators in identifying those suspects. So with the assistance of officers from the U.S. Marshals, Federal Task Force, Santa Rosa Police Department, Vallejo Police Department, San Pablo Police Department, the Berkeley Police Department, 2 suspects, one a 19-year-old Santa Rosa man and a 17-year-old Vallejo juvenile were arrested. In those warrants, several dangerous weapons were seized, 2 of which were assault weapons, 4 handguns, a 50-round drum magazine, and ammunition. We believe both suspects are associated with gangs. In terms of community engagement, this past week, members of our department participated in a community meet with Councilmember Wengraf at Cordonesis Park. And then earlier today, members of the department provided a presentation on de-escalation concepts to the law and social justice class at BHS. In terms of staffing, we had 1 officer who medically retired. So we're currently staffed with 154 sworn officers. That number includes 3 people who are currently in the academy and due to graduate in December, and then an additional 3 who started this past week. We as a department are currently recruiting for entry-level positions with another academy starting for us in January of 2022. And then lastly, I would make you all aware that officers are continuing to complete the 4 hours of update training on fair and impartial policing concepts. And additionally, 4 more officers are scheduled to attend the 40-hour CIT class later this month.
Thanks. Any questions for Lieutenant?
I did. I think Julie might, our board member Leftwich might have raised her hand first, though.
Yeah, if everybody uses their raised hand icon, that'll help me. Board member Leftwich.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to see if you were familiar with this, a program that I heard about in the news recently. It's in LaGrange, Georgia, and it's a program there that the chief is calling Shoot to Incapacitate. And so the idea is that they're training officers to shoot suspects in the legs, pelvis, or abdomen where that could stop a deadly threat without killing the person. And it's really an interesting, it sounded very interesting to me. The chief has been there for 20-something years, super progressive, one of the first to require video recordings or body-worn camera and crisis intervention training. And he had received some pushback from some law enforcement agencies saying that just requires too much training, which also made me remember that a few months ago, I had read about a very innovative training program. It was like a virtual training. I'm forgetting what it's called. I didn't have a chance to look back over my notes, But I personally thought both of these things were super interesting. And I wondered if you were familiar with either of those.
So for the first one, in LaGrange, the shoot to incapacitate, I'm not aware of it. I have not heard of that. The second item that you mentioned, it sounds like the firearm simulator type training that's computer-based. And we have gone through some of that. In fact, when I first started 21 years ago, we had, it's called, I think it's FATS, the firearm training simulator, that we would run people through, and you could talk to a screen, and you had simulated weapons with compressed air. So I know there has been an increased popularity with that type of training, and it is something that we have been through.
Yeah, it was a simulator, but it was very high tech and very realistic, apparently. So, you know, was viewed as real valuable. Well, I might provide the director with some information about the Georgia program, because I think a lot of members of the public, including me, when you see somebody killed, you're thinking, why didn't they shoot the person in the arms or the legs to stop them? And this program is based on law enforcement programs in other countries that really reduce deaths. So it just sounds very promising to me. Thank you.
Board Member Chang.
Yes. Hi, thank you for joining us today. I actually had two questions. The first one was if there was any information on the Berkeley High School incident of 2 Fridays ago. I'm interested in regard to the process that was enacted to notify BPD and to secure the campus. There's often a conversation around school safety, but also concerns around the presence of law enforcement on campus. And it could be interesting just to hear, like, in terms of the response to that with regard to the interaction between the safety officers, the SRO, and the Berkeley Police Department on campus. And also I add another question, which you may or may not be able to answer, with regard to, typically the chief reports on the hiring and staffing status. And I just had some questions about incentives for recruitment and retention that the chief and the department has available to them. To her. Thank you.
So I'll have to get back to you with information regarding a follow-up on the DHS incident. I apologize, I was away at a town at training last week, so I don't have anything new for you there. In terms of incentives and retention ideas, I know we have talked, and I think the BPA has also talked with the city about various ideas. Currently, I don't believe we're offering incentives for recruitment or retention.
And what kind of ideas are on the table?
I haven't been a part of those conversations. What is typical around the state, there are hiring bonuses. I've also heard of agencies offering incentives to help bring new officers to the department. So that might be a cash benefit if a recruit or a new hire comes in with a recommendation from a current employee. Those are the two ones that I hear discussed most frequently.
Sure. And I know you will follow up again with the chief on this, but one popular form of retention initiative or incentive is in particular for educational reimbursement. Certainly that's present in employers I've been with, and it's a good way to retain staff that are experienced and to maintain seniority and subject matter expertise and avoid brain drain, so to speak. I think regardless of the size of your department, that's an important way to maintain that leadership cadre inside of any employer staffing. So that's something I suggest that should be raised and considered.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks. I don't see any other raised hands. I have two questions. One is, what's the status of vaccination with the department right now and the mandate?
So the mandate's in effect. I think October 15th was the deadline for completing the survey. I don't have the dates in front of me. There was a deadline for exemptions. I want to say it was November 15th, I think, was ultimately when the entirety of it was wrapped up.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I think that's when everything goes into full effect.
Did you say
I-
November
I-
15th?
I believe it's November 15th is the date by which we would be required to be fully inoculated, meaning both shots and a 2-week period following the last shot.
Okay, two follow-up questions on this. One, you said that there was a survey. What percentage of officers have responded to whether or not they are currently vaccinated?
I don't know. It was what, a couple of weeks ago. I would be guessing. I haven't seen the survey.
Yeah, and what I'd be interested in is the percentage of officers who answered that question. Not necessarily. I mean, I'd also be interested.
I think we're all mandated. My guess would be that 100% filled it out. And
I guess I would like to know what the actual number is. Rather, so that would be good if you could, maybe go back to the chief and find out, I guess, what the percentage of people who actually responded to the question. And then secondly, what percentage of officers or what number of officers we believe are fully vaccinated, sworn officers. The second question I have is about, you mentioned 4-hour FIP training is going forward with some new officers or some additional officers. Would love to know, and this is something we talked about a bunch before, and I think we landed on that we could, but would love to know whether board members can observe that training real time, and if so, when it is, and how board members who are interested in seeing it could sign up.
sure, I'd be happy to get back to you with that.
Okay. Do you have any sense of when that training is going to be? We don't have another meeting right now scheduled for a month, so would love if you could get that information to the director so she could distribute it. Perhaps before that, if the training is going to happen before our next meeting.
Or I can probably get back to Director Lee just this week and let her know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions? Great. Thank you, Lieutenant.
Thank you.
Okay, subcommittee reports. So take these one at a time. One is fair and impartial policing implementation, which recently met and has, I know, another meeting coming up, but board member Calavita, who's chair of that subcommittee.
Yes, we met last week, and we again emphasized the importance of an EIS, an early intervention system, for looking at racial disparities, seeing patterns in the department, across officers and within the department. And also have prioritized the written consent forms for searches, the new consent forms, as well as the business card that will be provided at every civilian officer encounter, which will have on the back, I believe at this point, stickers that describe or inform people that if they have any complaints, that they can file a complaint with the PAB or internal affairs. And if they want to make commendations, they can do that as well. It was also discussed the importance of the department collaborating with us on the fair and impartial policing implementation. And I was asked to write a letter to the chief, to draft a letter to the chief, possibly coming from the full PAB and Chair Ramsey, and I will provide that to you before our next meeting on November 10th. And I think it's really a good idea to include PAB members who are interested, and especially the subcommittee on implementation, but certainly the whole, board, whoever's interested in that FIP training that was just discussed. It would be really good for us to be able to observe that. And so that's it for me. It's difficult to schedule these things. There's 7 subcommittee members, including the public. And but we are going to get going in November and have at least a couple. So that's it.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So the next is the director search. My understanding is that this subcommittee had not met to date because we're sort of waiting for a cue from Human Resources, but obviously it's it is a Police Accountability Board subcommittee. So my understanding is some members would like to meet. And so if that's the case, it seems like they should schedule a meeting. It's up to the subcommittee whether they have work to do and whether they want to meet. So I see Director Lee got your hand raised.
Yes. So first, let me follow up on the prior report.
Okay.
Board Member Calavita, your draft letter is on tonight's agenda.
I didn't see it in the packet.
I think we got it before, because I remember seeing it.
Oh, I think you got it on Friday.
Oh, excellent. So it's not in the packet.
It's not in the packet, but it's on the agenda, and I'm happy to pull it up on share screen when we get to that.
Very good. Thank you.
It's 10B of the agenda.
Thank you.
And then as far as director search, I can report that the contract is, it might now be signed, but it was going through the very slow bureaucratic process of the contract with the recruiting firm getting signed. So I spoke to Ms. Bello, and she has her assistant walking it through and making sure that it gets all the necessary signatures so that the consultant can get going. Now, until the consultant's on board, of course, the subcommittee can meet, but I'm not sure what they're going to do, because my understanding was that Ms. Bello came to the board to ask them to form the subcommittee
Okay.
in order to assist.
Okay, I'm gonna leave that up to the subcommittee. So we should have a meeting of the
Okay.
subcommittee. They can pick a chair, and then they can decide what they want to do. But apparently several members, both of the public and or at least some members who are public members and board members would like to have a first meeting. So we should get that scheduled.
Okay.
Board Member Calvita.
No, I was just going to say, I'm not on that subcommittee, but I think it's really important to meet. And I would think that the PAB would have some initial business that they might want to conduct, including how they might want to do outreach and begin some kind of recruitment efforts. So that's all. I'm not on the subcommittee, so.
Okay. So, we can leave it up to them. So, but Board Member Levine.
Yes, I was feeling in anticipation of this question a little guilty because I'm on this subcommittee and we haven't met. So I called Human Resources, but I wasn't able to get through. So that's why I took my hand down. But how, I suppose I should talk to Director Lee about how to organize the subcommittee meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I think Director Lee first can send around a poll about trying to get a date for people to meet. And then when you meet,
Okay.
you'll have to pick she can agendize certain things such as selecting the chair of the subcommittee. And there may be some very general agenda topics for discussion that she can list. And then that'll allow you guys to at least meet and move forward. If you then, don't have things agendized properly, you'll have to set another meeting and agendize it then. But you can at least agendize something along the lines of, overall objectives of the subcommittee or something like that for
I
discussion.
will do that.
Good.
Great. Okay, great. Anything else on the director search subcommittee? Doesn't look like it. So regulations, I'm going to call on board member Vice Chair Chang.
Yes. Hi. So regulations is composed of myself, board members Calavita, Leftwich, Owens, and public member Kit Saganor. Am I missing anybody, guys?
No,
That's it.
Okay. We're basically status quo. We're meeting November 2nd. And as stated in the last public meeting, we will be continuing to move forward on regulations towards the ends of a permanent regulations, but we're awaiting further process with regard to the interim and the other questions that were raised in prior meetings, and that I'm sure will be raised when we have a conversation with the city attorney in a little while. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, that's all for the subcommittee reports. Now on to old business. So this goes to 9A. We had 3 parts before. I think we answered 2 of them. So there's 1 left. Question to city attorney's office regarding the confidential memo on the obligation to meet and confer over provisions of interim regs for handling complaints against sworn officers, specifically whether the city attorney can meet with us in closed session to discuss the memo. And we have Deputy City Attorney Sam Harvey with us. So I'll give the floor to him.
Thank you. Yes, so we think there's a need to meet in closed session with the board to discuss the current status of ongoing negotiations with EPA as part of that meaningful process. So that memo we provided already speaks to that. So that can, that'll be germane to that discussion at that closed session meeting.
Okay.
And then the second memo, which we will be providing in the next 24 hours, is also germane to that discussion. So that can be part of that discussion as well.
So I think what that means is along the lines of what Director Lee said earlier. If we can have the November 17th meeting for training on the meet and confer requirements, we could do that training and then move right into closed session to discuss hopefully both memos, which we'll have from them. Any questions, comments? First up, I see Vice Chair Chang.
Yes, thank you, City Attorney Harvey, for the update. I just want to ask again, and you tell me if I've missed anything, it's possible. Has there been any form of public dissemination of information regarding the information on this issue that can be provided publicly without triggering that confidentiality issue?
I think that's something we could discuss in the closed session meeting about what the is appropriate to sort of send out to the general public as part of that discussion. I think right now, because that discussion focuses on legal analysis and strategic legal strategy related to ongoing negotiation, we feel there's some sensitivity there, but I think part of the discussion around the negotiations that we can engage in that closed session is what should be going out to the public, what parts of
Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, what parts of that analysis we think are the public needs to have, should have, is going to be interested in hearing about, and sort of looking at whether how that fits within the context of a confidential ongoing negotiation and PAB's sort of strategic benefits of releasing, or not releasing information in an ongoing negotiation.
Sure, I understand, Dan. That makes a lot of sense in many ways. But is there any information that is just based upon general legal principles that have been raised in prior public meetings that perhaps in the interim, the city's attorneys could release?
Are you referring to the meet and confer subject or the substantive?
Meetings
Question around-
I think would be one area, but the substantive issues as well, if there are general principles of the law that might apply there, or practices in the city of Berkeley that you believe are the standards that are going to apply for our conversations in the meeting, in the closed session that are relevant, that type of information I think would be helpful to members of the public to understand, what the next steps are and what standards are being applied.
Sure. I think, when it comes to the legal question around the proposed policies and where we stand on that and the history there, because that's part of confidential legal advice at this point, I don't think, we're comfortable just sort of publishing that broadly. But we're happy to provide sort of general policies around meet and confer, which we've provided already in the document. But I think in terms of the specifics of that memo, we would want to wait until we go into closed session with PAB and evaluate PAB's sort of position before sort of divulging, legal advice and strategic advice to the public.
Okay, thank you. I'm hearing legal and strategic. Thank you very much.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? Okay, then that is 9A. So kind of related to that, kind of have already answered this, but status of memo from City Attorney's Office regarding changes to hearing process to correct imbalances or legality of that. So it sounds like that from what you said, Mr. Harvey, that memo is on the way, but let me give you an opportunity to explain or clarify.
Sure, yeah, we've completed a memo looking at the substantive question around the proposed policy that PAB adopted, with an eye towards addressing potential imbalances between the parties in the disciplinary process. That memo looks at the history around the old procedures, how those sort of came into be, the legal and policy considerations that went into that adoption of those old procedures, and then kind of where we stand today, and then also looks at the sort of other policy lane that the board has considered of dismissing both parties and having the board separately question parties without the other party present. So that memo will be coming to you in the next, I think, 24 hours, and happy to discuss as it relates to the ongoing negotiations with BPA when we get into closed session. It sounds like probably on the 17th.
Vice Chair Chang.
So the memo is the memo on symmetry that we discussed previously to address imbalances in the right to hear and quote unquote cross-examine or question the two different parties involved. So with regard to that memo on symmetry, is the plan to issue that as a confidential memo, or will it be a publicly available memo?
That'll be a confidential memo at this time, because it relates to ongoing negotiations and it contains confidential legal advice and strategic advice in light of that sort of legal analysis.
So when we have when we set up the closed hearing, that will be in part of the conversation as well, I assume?
Correct.
He's nodding his head. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments, questions? Board Member Levine.
Yes, will we schedule that meeting today so we know, have a concrete plan to when we're going to meet and have this attorney-client discussion? Is that what's proposed for the 17th?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, some of it depends on people's availability on the 17th, but it seems like if we can get a quorum, we'll do it. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. So one more city attorney issue, and I'm not sure, I don't think Deputy City Attorney Harvey, he's already explained this in an earlier meeting, but this is, I think, on the agenda for any discussion. So that's or potentially action if someone has some recommendations, but city attorney conflict of interest issues.
Sure, so I'm happy to speak to this. This is an area we're happy to provide some further, explanation and analysis and, primary source materials in terms of state bar opinions. I think, on the one hand, this is fairly well trodden ground that in an advisory capacity, city attorney's offices, general counsel for corporations, attorneys who advise entities rather than individuals, frequently provide advice to multiple departments without creating a recognizable conflict under the rules of professional conduct. I think when you speak about enforcement and disciplinary proceedings, there's more potential for conflicts to arise. I think more members of the public noted, what happens when the city is defending itself against a claim arising from officer conduct in court, and at the same time, HAB is undergoing a disciplinary process related to those same facts. That could be an area where conflict arises, and the city attorney's office would look at whether we would need to either bring in outside counsel or create a firewall within the city attorney's office between different attorneys. So, I think it's certainly an area. Our office frequently advises departments throughout the city with differing positions. I think in some ways it speaks to the distinction between legal conflicts, which we would, certainly be on the lookout for and take steps to mitigate, versus policy and political conflicts. Our office is nonpartisan, impartial, and on questions of policy, we really take great pain to refrain from weighing in on sort of policy from a purely policy standpoint. So staying in our lane as provide legal advice. With that being said, I think I personally and our office are committed to making sure that this body fulfills the mandate that's been given by the voters, fulfills its legal mandate under the charter, and gets up and running in its complete role that it's required to do by the city charter. And I think there's been times in this process where steps taken by staff, by our office to enter into meet and confer, or to move something to a different council agenda, were taken in the interest of ensuring the integrity of HAB's procedures and making sure that those things are adopted and put in place in a way that is not subject to some challenge down the road. So, I think unfortunately, because of sort of ongoing negotiations, there's been a need for us to be strategic in what type of information we put out there. And I think, our office is often going to be the bearer of bringing news about how things need to happen more slowly sometimes, which I know is frustrating this body, but, happy to continue to provide advice and have this ongoing discussion about, how the conflict issue plays out. I would add that our office is currently looking into bringing on a subject matter expert who would be an outside attorney, who would be someone who has, from a private law firm, who has experience in meet and confer and perhaps, also police oversight areas, and just to sort of deepen the bench here, provide additional perspective and experience. So once we have that person identified, we'll bring them on board and maybe have that person provide some additional training on for on the 17th. We've kind of finalized, bringing someone else on at that point.
And so I would just add 2 points before we jump in. I'm going to call on Board Member Leftwich and then Board Member Chang. And I would just emphasize 2 things that were brought up in the public comment. One by Mr. Clark, who talked about the standard under the charter. I think that is one question, and that's whether there is essentially whether the rules of professional conduct require a mandatory withdrawal from the city attorney due to a conflict. And I think that's one thing essentially that the city attorney's office has been speaking to. But that's to try to at least frame these things. That's one question. The second question is the one that Mr. Lippman spoke to, and that's whether it's just simply prudent to have outside counsel and whether the council should support that in order to avoid an appearance of conflict. So I do think those are 2 separate questions. We should be careful not to conflate those. They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Just because there's not a mandatory prohibition doesn't mean that there's not some discretionary ability to bring outside counsel when it's prudent. So on deck, we've got Board Member Leftwich, followed by Vice Chair Chang, followed by Board Member Levine.
Thank you. So we had asked for a written analysis on the conflict of interest issue. I understand that the city will be, or your office will be retaining outside counsel to give you some advice about that. And I'm just wondering when we might expect to get something in writing. It sure would be great if we're going to have a closed session to be able to talk about this as well as the other issues that we're going to be discussing that night.
Sure. I think we'll have to think about whether the conflict of interest discussion itself is germane to the rationale for the closed session. The closed session would be to discuss ongoing labor negotiations. I think there's probably a rationale by which it's germane, but we'll want to think about that. I think we can provide some initial sort of written analysis, probably not full-fledged memo, but some sort of summary of the issue and as well as some, if commissioners are interested, decisions from the state bar and other sources that kind of speak about that. I'll say, as with a lot of these conflict questions, they hinge often on, case by case facts of the specific potential conflict. But I think, we can provide at least some initial written thoughts by that 17th date.
Okay, thanks. And maybe we don't need a closed session. I mean, as long as we can be candid about it.
Right, and I think that's probably right. It's not, speaking in general about this concept is not sort of getting to the meat of something specific for ongoing negotiations or something like that. So I think there's definitely room for some significant, discussion on it in an open session.
But I don't know if I missed it. Did you say when we might expect to get something in writing from your office on this subject?
I think at least something by that 17th date we can provide some kind of
Thank you.
initial write-up. Yeah.
Okay, Vice Chair Chang.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy City Attorney Harvey, for taking questions and patiently answering our questions. I do want to respectfully disagree on what you stated, that the city attorney's primary role is as an advisory council. I think you have, dual roles as possibly as advisory council in some situations, but in other situations you are a council that who represents the city. I'm curious in that vein. You said that you work with a lot of different parts of the city. Are there other models of how do you interact with are there other independent type of commissions, something analogous to the PAB or the PRC? that the city attorneys has interacted with, and what's the working relationship there?
Sure. I think your distinction of the different roles is correct. I think we certainly serve an advisory role, but also, appear in court on behalf of the city and represent the city in front of other settings, different administrative boards, state boards, as an advocate. So that's correct. I think PAB is an unique body. It's, sort of this, I think you would call it quasi-independent in its structure within the city. Its role is still advisory to council. It's appointed by council, and on matters of discipline, it's advisory to the city manager or the chief of police and the city manager. So, we work, and then there's the other, myriad commissions in the city where we, advise the commission and also the staff those commissions. In all those cases, we are, for instance, I'm also secretary to the Fair Campaign Practices Commission and the Open Government Commission. So, I think advising multiple commissions within the city is something our office is fairly comfortable with. It's something we do all the time. I think we aren't there to sort of advocate internally within the city between staff or the commission or between departments. We're there to provide sound legal advice so that decisions made by the city and its many organs are have integrity and are and stick. So it's certainly a role we serve in constantly.
So, and part of the reason why I asked that question is because I think that the PAB, or the former Police Review Commission, is a very different animal than those other types of commissions that you referred to. Which, for example, some of them you sit on those commissions, but at the same time you're the deputy city attorney. Presumably, you wouldn't be able to sit on the Police Accountability Board without having to recuse yourself if something came up such as this, if you were a board member at the same time of being deputy city's attorney. I think that would be a conflict of interest. So I'm curious, and I know these are complex issues and you're answering a lot of questions. So this is all in total professional context. I respect your responses here. I'm not trying to cross-examine you. Sorry, you're being hit with so many questions, but you referred to the PAB as maybe a quasi-independent commission or board. I don't think, that we're quasi. I think we should be thought of as independent. Yes, there are some characteristics where we have to run through the city council, et cetera. But that's by nature. Some type of process has to occur for appointment and election. I'm not sure what would make us quasi. I would refer to us as fully independent. And I hope that would be the consideration by the city's attorney's office.
Yeah, I guess I just say quasi because it's an appointed body. It's not, you aren't separately elected. It's not like the rent board, I guess, which is separately elected. So there's more of a distinction there. The decision, there isn't a final decision-making authority with PAB, right? PAB can't impose discipline on an officer. It has to go through a subsequent chain, right? For that to be a final decision. But I think your point is correct. That PAB is distinct from most other city commissions in that sense, and the charter amendment speaks to that. And in particular, PAB staff is specifically not under the city manager, right? Which is not true of all other city staff. The rest of us are, to some degree, under the city manager. So, yeah, I think that's right. I think PAB is in a big unique role, but maybe not as. There may be an echelon of independence beyond that PAB doesn't reach, but it's certainly more independent than the vast majority of the other commissions in the city.
Okay, thank you. I'll let others speak now.
Thanks. So I'll give everyone an opportunity to speak. I am going to ask folks, we're going to have time to talk about the city attorney conflict issues, hopefully in closed session. As long as people need, obviously I'll give, but we do have a 1-hour training session and several different items. So we want to make sure that several in closed session and some others. So just please keep that in mind. But Board Member Levine.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Harvey. Just briefly, I think this is a structural problem, not a case-by-case one. I attended one of the NACOL, the national organization that advises and consults among PAB type people, members of agencies that various cities have. And one of the new executive director in Chicago, they formed a new board around the same time that Berkeley did. Very different, huge city, much different problems, but they have written into their structure separate counsel for the reasons that they believe it's a structural problem rather than a case-by-case one. I think it would be instructive to look at other cities, maybe more similar to Berkeley, to address this issue, get some advice.
I think that's helpful, and I'll take a look at the NAPO materials. We are bound by the charter language, which makes our office counsel to this body, but as has been noted, there are provisions in the charter around conflicts, and so I think we'll take a look at those materials.
Board Member Calvito.
Yes, and thank you, Mr. Harvey. It seems to me that we have Berkeley Law School here with several experts in labor law and police unions, as well as other issues that are pertinent to what we're dealing with. And I'd imagine there may be several law professors there, experts in these areas, who might be willing to advise the PAB as outside counsel on a pro bono basis. So my question is, how might such outside counsel be considered relative to the city attorney's office, whether they could be considered our independent legal counsel, and whether there would be anything in the charter that would prohibit us using such pro bono experts as outside legal counsel?
That's a good question. I don't know if I know the answer today. I think we'd have to look at the language of the charter. I think our office would continue to provide advice to the board, but the board is also free to invite members of the public or whoever to speak to them on anything they want. So certainly, if the board wants to take advantage of resources and experience out there in the community.
Did I lose you?
No, he's still.
I'm sorry.
Is it me or is it Mr. Harvey?
I was able to continue to hear him. So
I think it's your connection.
I can hear you.
So Board Member.
I was having some connection issues earlier today.
Yeah.
I apologize if it's my end.
I think Board Member Calvito, you're frozen. So I'd recommend you, if you stop your video and just listen to audio, that may help. I sort of control the stop video, so I think I'm going to stop. Oh, we lost her completely. Oh no, she's there.
I lost you for a moment. I'm back.
Yeah, so if you freeze your video, that might help, because I think there was a connection problem. Great, thanks.
All right. Yeah. All right. Well, I was thinking more not in terms of somebody coming in to speak to us. I was thinking in terms of being able to address counsel as our legal counsel.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Anyway, thank you.
I don't see any other raised hands, although Board Member Harris, I think I saw your hand go up and then go down. So I thought I should just check. You're okay. All right. Thanks. Okay. Thank you on this topic. If there are no other comments, we'll move to the standing rules. And so we've got 10 minutes for this to affirm or revise the permanent standing rules. So Director Lee, you're muted.
What I'd like to do, Chair, is share my screen. And I think we can keep this pretty short. There's really just one section to focus on. And I'm bringing it up now. Okay, can people see that?
Yes.
Okay, let me enlarge it. Okay, so let me get down to the section on elections. And in my Friday email to you, there are two issues. One is that I drafted this before I did the minutes. And I did this version from my notes, and my notes were not complete, which I discovered when I did the minutes. So the minutes said that, so I want to point you to section, let me scroll up a little bit and adjust my screen so that I have people blocking my view of my screen. Okay, so shoot. Did that go tiny on everybody?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having a problem with, so now I'm on my laptop instead of my desktop, which is working better because I'm not losing you as I was in the past couple meetings, but it's a little harder with the using the mouse pad. Okay, here we are. Elections. So what you actually voted on was to say elections shall be held in the second January meeting of each year. In the board meeting preceding the election meeting, board members shall nominate other members or themselves. So it was that second section that I left out. Second sentence, I'm sorry. And then other things, so regardless of that, there's still an issue about what's going on between the first and the second meetings. And so I added this number 2 that is in red, because otherwise everything A, B, C, and D was just flowing into E, F, and G without a distinction about what was going to happen. Sorry. What activities were happening during which meeting. So I'm sorry.
It looks good.
Okay. Well, do you want to adopt this, or do you want to go include the language of, it said in the board member preceding the election meeting, board members shall nominate other members or themselves.
I actually have some thoughts about the language.
Okay.
I think what we voted on last time is a little bare bones, but I think we could fix this one. I also had several minor, like missing words in other parts of the standing rules. But on this, in number 1, the second sentence, during the board meeting preceding the election meeting, it should be the nomination of the chair will precede the nomination of the vice chair.
Okay. I'm going to mark this, this is for discussion so everybody can see it.
Yeah.
Let me make sure I'm tracking changes. wasn't a tracking change. Okay, I don't know why it's not showing up, but. Chair will sit and the nomination of the chair will precede the.
Nomination.
Nomination.
Yes.
And then under B at the end, I think we could add and may decline the nomination. Just to say, somebody, if they don't want to do it, they can decline the nomination.
Okay.
And then we need a period at the end of C after the parens.
Uh-huh.
And then the next sentence, so a member of the public had raised the issue last time that I thought made sense, that maybe people, if they think about it, after the first meeting, they then say, well, actually, you know, I would like to be chair, or somebody would like to nominate someone else, that we shouldn't necessarily, or we should talk about whether we want to foreclose any additional nominations. So if we don't want to foreclose them, we could add something below 2 that says additional nominations, comma, if any, comma, shall proceed in accordance with section I1. But if we are, and I personally like the idea of it, but if you know, I'm open to discussing it. Or I would put, if any, additional nomination. Well, I guess that's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I just put in accordance with section 1.1.
That is an I. It's kind of confusing, but it is I1.
Okay. In accordance with, a with there. But then if we are going to allow additional nominations in the second meeting, we might want to remove D from 1. I mean, I don't know if we need to declare, I mean, declaring the nomination process closed if we're going to allow them. I guess I would just review
Right.
that,
Okay.
delete that sentence. So those were the thoughts I had about that section.
Any other comments?
And then, as I said, I had, if people didn't want to discuss the election section, I just had a few minor things elsewhere.
Yeah, why don't you go through those and tick them off one at a time? So
Okay.
over.
Under section G, policy complaints and reviews, second line, a member of the public by filing a policy complaint on a form. We just need the word
Oh,
a
yeah.
there.
Thank you.
And then under 3 at the bottom, second sentence, possible actions include but are not limited to considering the issue as a whole board.
Okay. Oops.
Assigning a board member to research the issue, asking staff to investigate or research the issue. Just add the issue. So yeah, that's what I have there. And then under J1, second to the last line, on the public record on their intent. And then the last thing was just a question on mutual aid agreements. Because I haven't been involved in this and don't remember discussions about it. So it says the boards shall constitute a mutual aid subcommittee no later than the first meeting in February to review the PACs. And so my question is the intent just to review new PACs, or every year I don't even know how many there are, but is the intent for us to review all existing PACs every year?
That's up to the subcommittee. So historically, the PRC subcommittee or the PRC body could direct the subcommittee as to its scope. So I think in 2012, which is before I was here, but when I came in 2014, I saw all the documentation of a complete review of all the mutual aid PACs at that time, and memorandum of understanding. And in fact, maybe this should be retitled, because I think it's not all mutual aid, it's all memoranda of understanding. And but after that, the scope was generally limited to new or revised agreements, and then anything that the subcommittee or the PRC felt that they wanted to look at.
I just think this language might be a little vague. We might want to clarify, because when you just read it, it's not really clear what the intent is.
Okay. I think I would add a sentence, something like,
Maybe it could be the subcommittee may review new PACs or existing PACs as it deems appropriate, or is that the concept, something like that?
yeah, how about the subcommittee may determine, could I say, how about the board of the subcommittee? Because the board may say,
Right.
subcommittee to do this. Okay, board or the subcommittee may determine which, I'm going to say agreements.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask, is PACs?
Yeah.
Is that the correct?
It should be
term?
agreements. The board of subcommittee
Agreement.
to review that. And then we'll change this.
Change that, yeah, to agree.
And then I'm gonna, I should have caught this before, but I think this should be MOUs.
Well, wait a minute. But isn't it really a mutual aid agreement as opposed to an MOU? Because an MOU implies an employment relationship, and a mutual aid agreement is two independent bodies coming to an agreement as to how they're going to function in coordination with each other.
Mutual aid is a little, would describe some of these agreements, but not all of them. So it's not an agreement to act together. Sometimes there are agreements that one agency will provide, the county is going to provide certain services to BPD because BPD doesn't have the resources. Or there's an agreement with a nonprofit, for instance, that provides counseling services to victims of sex crimes. And so the department will call in when this kind of a crime happens and the department is made aware of it, they will come in and have this members of this group come in who, you know, are trained in being sensitive and provide the kind of support that usually a woman needs after that kind of a traumatic experience. So that, you know, so they really run the gamut, and that's what, and they do include mutual aid agreements, but it's really.
How about How about mutual aid and cooperation agreements? Does that cover it? Or
Well, actually, I'm trying to think of what the name, because these are governed by the Berkeley Municipal Code. And so I think it's agreements with other law enforcement agencies is what it is.
Could you maybe look into that and just
Yes.
change? And then I just had one last very minor thing under J3.
Okay, sorry. Get there. J3,
Yeah,
there's a period in there.
right.
Okay. Is that
Thank
it?
you. Yes,
Okay.
that's everything.
Thank you for your eagle eye.
Thanks, Board Member Owens.
So I want to go back to the mutual aid agreements.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean if they come up with a mutual aid agreement, let's say in July of a year, that the board can't review it until the following February? That's what's confusing me, because this is saying that the board will review it. They'll set up a subcommittee and review it. So what happens if there's a mutual aid agreement or an MOU that's done, some other time of the year? Does that mean the board or the subcommittee can't review it until February?
No, this is not intended to be exclusive. And the reason it's written this way is that under the BMC, the department is supposed to bring a whole set of agreements that it has with other law enforcement agencies to the council for approval. And so routinely, the PRC would ask for the new and revised ones before they were going to council to see if they had, would recommend to the full commission adoption, or if they had questions. It was usually questions that would be answered by the department about why is this changing? Why is this a new agreement? Why do we need this agreement? Things like that.
So they don't enter into either MOUs or mutual aid agreements any other time of the year?
They do. They come to the council for approval once a year. And so I think they're usually actually already, I don't remember. And I don't know if Lieutenant Rittenhouse has anything to do with this and can help me here. But I don't know if they're usually already entered into by the time they go to council.
It just seems strange that they're, because mutual aid agreements or MOUs seem to be done throughout the year. So I don't know. It just seems.
Yes, I understand. I get your point. And there's just this has a long history that predates me about how it's been handled.
It does say no later than the first meeting in February, so it can certainly be done sooner, as soon as it's entered into, right?
Right. And this again really speaks to the whole, what they call compendium. But there's nothing that prevents the board from considering any individual agreement that's made during any other time of the year. So,
Okay, so I'd like to move.
maybe it would be helpful if it said, let's see, if we said the compendium of agreements, and so that's a reference to that specific set. And then it doesn't look like you're bound to looking at other individual agreements at any other time of the year.
Okay. So why don't we do this? I think there's two areas that maybe we can just take a quick roll call vote about whether we want to accept these changes in the motion, if there is a motion to adopt these in a second. So we could first do mutual aid, then second do the election changes, and then come back and vote on whatever is remaining, if that works. Is there someone who'd like to make a motion? A second?
I move we make these changes to the mutual aid agreement such as Director Lee is writing, to review the compendium of agreements
Oh, sorry.
between, yes, just adding compendium of agreements.
Right, between. Okay, so why don't we take a vote? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, so we had second from Board Member Harris. So why don't we just take an initial vote on the mutual aid language?
Okay.
Maybe we can do this by consent.
Yeah, does,
Yeah.
Okay, all right, let me see if there's an objection. Is there any objection to the change in mutual aid language? Okay, not seeing there, so that's gonna be accepted into the motion, and then the second part is the election nomination changes. Is there any objection to that? Could you display that, Ms. Director Lee?
sure.
I'll just give people, a couple of seconds to look at that. Are there any objections to these changes? Okay, not seeing any objections, those will be accepted by unanimous consent. I think all the other changes are typos, basically. Or
Yeah.
not substantive. So let's take a vote on accepting the standing rules as amended overall. Are there any objections?
Could I take this? Could we do a roll call on this one?
Okay,
please?
that's fine. Then let's take the roll
And
call.
have somebody make a motion, please.
Well, the motion's made. The motion was made by Board Member Calavita and seconded by Board Member Harris. So
Oh, okay.
let's call the roll.
Okay, on the motion to accept the standing rules as modified tonight, Calavita,
Yes,
Chang,
Yes.
Harris,
Yes.
Lefwich,
Yes.
Levine,
Yes,
Mizell,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Owens. Owens,
Oh, yes.
okay, and Ramsey.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So moving on to the next agenda item, we have the policy complaint, which we put off because that's we don't have the officer there. So that's going to be continued till next meeting. And now we have new business. Board Member Mizell, body worn cameras. You want to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wanted us to review the body-worn camera policy. I'm focusing specifically on the section referring to the Police Review Commission, which I believe is on page 24 of the packet. Ultimately, I think we've already dealing with some issues around the production of body-worn camera footage and what process precisely should be used for us to access and view footage. I guess my opinion, but I think this is just a fact of the new charter language is, simply put, anything that is in the furtherance of our duties, which certainly, hearing complaints, of course, but also hearing from folks who are initiating the complaint and looking for us to either accept, reject it. We need to have that body-worn camera footage. It would be imprudent of us to not have it at those hearings. And I think it ultimately is a disservice to potential complainants if we do not have the footage ready at their hearings and they have to either come back for us to have it for another hearing or wait to see it. So in any case, sorry?
I was just gonna say, can you say again that section? I was just gonna display it on a share screen.
Yeah, I believe it's page 24. Of course, I just
Can you
lost
give me
it.
the section number? Because for some reason,
Oh, yes,
my page 24, I have page 24, but it says Oh, Police Review Commission. Okay, I've got it right there. I'll share a screen. There you go. Sorry.
Yes, so I had written up some language, but I think this is more a conversation piece between Ms. Lee or excuse me, Director Lee and, the department. Though in terms of broad changes to this section, to me, the top should be changed to essentially say, instead of a specific complaint, but should say really in the furtherance of our duties. I put up some proposed language, but I'm not clear on how that evidence management system works. So I don't know if Director Lee, you have any.
Do you think this is something that needs a subcommittee?
No, I don't think we can fix it tonight. So I plan to be brief on this item, but I wanted to open the discussion. Given that it's just a section, I don't think so at this juncture, but I know that could change.
Okay. Well, in the interest of time, and obviously this is important, but now we know the precise section you're interested in, maybe it would be okay for you if we put this over to the next meeting, and then that'll give everybody an opportunity to look closely at it, see if whether there's any proposed language. If you have proposed language, we could send it around and put that as part of the next packet.
Yes, I would just ask it at this juncture, if Director Lee, if you have foresight into how this evidence management system operates.
Yes, that's basically I guess you could describe it as the software platform. So when videos are uploaded, they get uploaded into something called the evidence management system. And each one is labeled, they're associated, at the end of the shift, the officer has to, if there's a case associated with it, then they have to tag it. And when we do it, pardon me?
With a particular report.
Yes. If it has a case, they tag it with the case number, sorry. And then when an investigation comes in, staff request the video. And then, so Mr. Norris and I have accounts for the evidence management system. And then we are given access to specific video. Well, we're given access to the video for the incident in the complaint. So obviously this was written at a time for the PRC and its process, and clearly does need to be revised. And I have had preliminary discussions with the chief, but she hasn't completed her thoughts on it. So it would be helpful if there were additional things that you wanted to add, but certainly I am interested in broadening the purposes for which we can have access. There's another issue about whether the particular issue that is for the item that's on closed session that's being postponed is whether it could be shown before a hearing to a complainant and their representative. So that's currently not allowed here. And then in the COVID era, technically I'm not supposed to access the video from home, which is where I am. So I wouldn't be able to do it if I'm running the meeting from home. As you know, as some of you know, having been on the PRC and watching the video during BOIs, Mr. Norris and I generally are more comfortable being in the office doing the BOIs. And so it's not a problem to show it from there.
Thank you, Director Lee. And I guess my last point on this, and yeah, we can discuss language another time, but I think, ultimately the charter has already overridden this section in terms of the language about when we can access and for what reasons is already been overridden by the charter. If it is in the furtherance of our duties, which certainly it's our duty to have as much evidence as we can in the consideration of complaints and potential complaints. So to me, it doesn't obviously need to be updated, but the conversation around expansion of access to me should be very short because the charter has already done that for us. And, you know, obviously we could have a discussion at a different point about subpoena power, which obviously we shouldn't have to use in this case. And I'm sure we can get worked out with the department, but this has already changed. And I hope the department understands that because this is on the books, it is superseded by the charter. And the charter says we can get access to these records when we need them in the furtherance of our duties within 10 days to respond, and another 30 business days if they need more time for some reason. But that is the law of the land now. Thanks.
Right. So the idea would be getting this to be comport with the charter amendment, and hopefully the police department would be willing to do that voluntarily. Board Member Leftwich, followed by Board Member Levine.
Yeah, I just remember in one of our meetings, the issue of retention came up too. So it seems to me that we should be looking closely at this section, which is 425.15 on page 21 of the packet. I didn't look at this closely beforehand, but as I look at it now, I realize, so the second sentence, incidents involving consensual contacts and aid to citizens will be retained for 6 months. I'm not sure what consensual contacts are, but my recollection is that we thought the retention wasn't long enough for purposes of people filing a complaint, because they could still file a complaint as a result of a consensual contact or an aid to a citizen, perhaps. I'm just saying, I think that's an issue that we should look at. And Director Lee also raised the issue of whether or not the complainant should be allowed to view the body worn camera. And I think the answer to that is yes. So we should definitely think about that as well.
Board Member Levine.
Yes, I just have a question. This says Berkeley Police Department Law Enforcement Services Manual. So this is the manual that's written up and constructed by the police department. Is that right, Director Lee?
This is their policy, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So-
I want to just correct one thing. It is their policy. This is the manual, but this particular policy was created in conjunction with the PRC subcommittee,
Yes.
PRC itself.
I understand that too, but how is it that, are we just going to suggest that they need to make these changes to comport with the amendments to the charter and then hope that they do? Is that?
I mean, I could see this shaking. I mean, usually when this is, like a normal sort of policy review, we raise the issue with the chief. Either we do it through a subcommittee or we would, ask for their participation at the full commission. I mean, the full board level itself. And so we'd ask them to send someone. And we generally make a recommendation, and sometimes they agree to the recommendation, sometimes simultaneously, sometimes later, but it's part of that discussion. I think in this particular instance, if they didn't agree to it, then I think, as Board Member Mizell has pointed out, we'd then have to think how we wanted to write our subpoena rules, because
Okay.
ultimately we would be given subpoena authority, which should, I think, override a policy saying that we're not entitled to them. This would, be voluntarily so.
Okay. Thank
But
you.
hopefully we'd we'd raise the issue and have a discussion, and hopefully they'd be willing to change it, particularly with the advice of the city attorney, if we had to comport with the charter. Slow moving. Getting all these things in play.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. I would say we at least started the PAB though 6 months earlier than required. So the fact that we're moving through this stuff at least got us a little bit of a head start. Okay. All right. Well, Board Member Mizell, I will keep that on the agenda and move forward with it. Thank you. That's important info. So I at least one appreciate you catching that. Okay, Commissioner, Board Member Calavito, we got 10 minutes on this, but consider letter to police chief requesting that she appear before the PAB to give a detailed progress report on implementation of the city council's mandates regarding fair and impartial policing, and to request collaboration as the early intervention system policy is being developed.
So this is just, you have a draft of the letter. These issues were decided at the subcommittee on implementation of fair and impartial policing. And this was just a draft that I bring to you to see if the full board wants to ask Chair Ramsey to send this to Chief Lewis, asking, she gave an update, a quarterly update to council that was part of her crime report that was quite brief, 2 pages, and not very detailed. And council has mandated that the PAB be the oversight body in charge of implementation, overseeing implementation of this. And in order to do so, the subcommittee felt that it needs to have a more detailed report on what's going on, including more explicit collaboration between the BPD and the PAB, specifically on the early intervention system and other issues. Anyway, you have a copy of the letter, so this was just, in hopes that you would approve Chair Ramsey sending this, if Chair Ramsey agrees, to the chief. We really need to, we are the oversight body, and this is an important set of recommendations that it took 2 years to put into place. A number of us were on that working group. Chair Ramsey was the chair of that working group, mayor's working group. And this is overseeing its implementation.
The only thing I would add is it seems like this should come from the Police Accountability Board, and then I would just sign it as chair.
Okay, that's good.
Are there any questions, comments, thoughts? I mean, it's basically asking for the chief to come give us a detailed report about the implementation of these various things. And as Board Member Calavita had indicated, this was seen as the body that would help oversee the implementation of those. The Fair and Impartial Working Group sort of continued to meet, but its role has been scaled back and is transferring to these subcommittee now that the PAB is in place. So
We scroll down I read this before, but I just don't have it in front of me.
yeah, absolutely.
If we're gonna, I just see one thing. It says, in my experience, if we're at the top there, if it's not gonna be from the chair,
Yeah.
Right,
it'd be
Yeah.
in our experience.
yeah.
Why
Good.
don't we just eliminate that phrase in my experience and just say with the transition
Yeah,
to the policy language and on other issues,
Right.
it has been enormously useful to collaborate.
right. But I thought it was great.
I'll leave it with you, Chair Ramsey, and Director Lee to fix that language. It's really two requests. The first is that the chief come and give us a detailed report on the implementation progress. And the second is asking for greater collaboration, especially as they write early policy drafts and not waiting until, fait accompli before we get to see what they've done.
And I
That's
think,
all I have.
Mhm. And I think this is, consistent with our desire on a lot of things. It's sort of to be collaborative and have a partnership with the police department and discussing these issues on the front end rather than sort of coming back on the back end and
Yeah,
ended up having to sort of contest things.
Mhm.
Can I move that this letter be finalized and sent out?
Okay, is there a second?
I second.
Okay, does anyone, so I have a motion by Board Member Leftwich, and I think Board Member Harris was the first in there. So has everyone had enough time to look at this, or do you need me to leave it on the screen? Okay, so I'm not seeing anyone who's raising their hand that says they need more time. Does anyone need more time, I should say? Okay, all right, if there's no objection, can we approve this by unanimous consent, or does someone want roll call? Does anyone want a roll call? Does anyone object? All right, not seeing nor hearing any, neither seeing nor. Okay, let's go to the agenda. Next on the agenda is training.
Okay, so
I'm
Lieutenant
here.
Rittenhouse. Lieutenant Rittenhouse, are you ready?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay,
Director Lee, I apologize for that. Bear with me, we were in the Watch Commander tonight, and so we were dealing with a situation right before this. So I want to thank the board, Chair Ramsey and Director Lee for allowing me to talk tonight. I know it's late, you're probably anxious to end your day and get back to your loved ones. So I do appreciate you delaying that a bit so I can share with you a little bit tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with people in crisis. You are also probably in luck because I know that when I'm nervous, I talk quickly, and I'm not a big fan of public speaking. So this 1 hour training may be over in about 10 minutes. But if that's the case, I'm going to request that Director Lee give you all credit for the full 1 hour. About 30 years ago, I was a teenager in college going to school at Cal Poly. My parents were living in New Jersey, and I was set to go home for the summer. Now, my mom was famous for finding me jobs when I wasn't looking for one. So oftentimes, or several times in high school, I'd come home from school only to find out that she'd found me a job at a golf course or a restaurant or some construction company. So this particular summer 30 years ago, when I went back east, I wasn't surprised at all to hear that she had a job for me lined up in a small manufacturing company. It was a small company, about 25 to 30 employees, all of whom were about 45 to 65 years old. And I was by far the youngest employee. A few weeks into it, my supervisor, John, came up, tapped me on the shoulder to let me know that I was going to be going with him to go pick up some supplies just a few towns over. Now, I hadn't met John before that summer. I didn't know much about him. What I did know was that he was married, that he had a couple of young kids, that he knew my parents from church. John was about 45 years old, had real dark hair. He was short. His face was kind of thin and gaunt, and usually unshaven. And so we jumped in the truck, and as we started off to grab the supplies, we're simply making small talk. John had a large scar on his neck that went down the side of his neck. And I don't know if he sensed that I was looking at it. I don't think I was, or if he was self-conscious about it. But he started to talk about it. And he told me he had throat cancer a few years back and that he had undergone treatment. He told me that he was currently cancer-free. I didn't really ask any questions. But after driving a little bit further, he brought it up again. And he went into more detail, just more detail about how difficult and horrific the treatment was, how scary it was. This feeling as he's going through it, like he was going to die, and what that would mean for his family. As John went on, I could tell he was starting to get emotional to the point where I could hear it in his voice, and he ends up pulling the truck over to the side of the road. And he doesn't even get it all the way to the side of the road. The back end of the truck is still a little bit in the street. And I remember John gripping the steering wheel just with both hands and shaking the steering wheel, or trying to move the steering wheel. And he started to cry uncontrollably. And for about 45 minutes, he was paralyzed, holding tight to the wheel and crying. The only thing in those 45 minutes that he could get through to me was that he didn't feel like he could do it again if the cancer returned. I'm 18 or 19, and I can still remember just how horrifying the sounds of him crying were, that he couldn't even remove his hands from the wheel to wipe away his tears. I remember him being, I remember just being disgusted with myself for not knowing what to say, to provide any comfort to him. I couldn't get through to him. We weren't communicating. He was just reiterating that he couldn't go through it again. I remember my heart breaking for this man. I remember feeling guilty about this, that sometimes a car would pass along the roadway and honk in annoyance that the back end of our truck was poking out in the roadway. And when they would, it would break the tension that was just in the cab of the truck. And I remember feeling guilty for that little relief of tension when they would honk. I remember feeling helpless to help him. And afterwards, I remember John profusely apologizing for crying. And it was awkward because I know that we didn't speak about that incident again for the rest of the summer, the rest of the time I was working there. What I didn't know then that I do know now was John was really the first person I ever experienced who was in crisis. After summer break was up, I flew back to San Luis Obispo. I had no idea that that role was going to have such an effect on me and really play a part of my career going forward. I was a business major. I didn't think I was going to be dealing with people in crisis. I was sure I was going to go into investments. I wasn't going to be dealing with a lot of these incidents. I wouldn't need this experience, but that wound up not being the case. As a result of my interaction with John in that summer, I've really had a heart for people in crisis. To this day, I eagerly go to those types of calls. I often think of John when I'm talking with somebody. I find myself at times try even harder to get through to somebody because of some guilt of my inability back then. That whole experience 30 years ago still today motivates me to try harder and learn more when I'm dealing with people in crisis. But I'm going to pause for just a second and introduce myself. I'm Rob Rittenhouse. I've been attending PRC and PAB meetings for the past few months. I've been a Berkeley police officer for the past 21 years. I'm currently assigned as a watch commander. I work evenings on the weekdays. I know you all heard from Lieutenant Landrum a few weeks back in his training about patrol operations. You have some sense of what it is I'm assigned to do. I've been very fortunate in my career here. I've had a variety of different assignments and experiences. I've worked in community services, in homicide as a detective, patrol, and in traffic as a supervisor. I've also spent 15 years as a hostage negotiator and was the team leader. I'm involved in our peer support network. And I've done some volunteering on the county crisis line dealing with people in crisis and who are suicidal, and also getting homeless individuals housing, emergency housing as a part of that volunteer work. I'm married to a wonderful woman. I'm a proud father of 3 really great kids, which probably my greatest accomplishment. All right, so that's me. Tonight, I was hoping to take you through a few areas and share my experiences with you. Nothing really about my experience or experiences are all that special. By that I mean that my experience is pretty typical of a Berkeley officer. The things that I've seen and been a part of and deal with are things that most officers here in this city will experience. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about 5 main areas. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our officers' experience with crisis, sort of in their own lives, their personal lives. I'll talk about CIT and the types of training that we receive. I'll talk about the criteria to place somebody on the 5150 hold. Then we'll kind of delve into what crisis looks like here in Berkeley and some of the types of things we see and some methods we use when we're dealing with somebody in crisis. Like me dealing with my supervisor, John, when I was a teenager, our officers bring a wide variety of personal experiences to the calls they go on every single day. We don't just deal with stuff at work here and then go home to lives that are quiet and perfect. I know that our officers here, we have officers who have kids who are on the spectrum and struggle to communicate. And several years ago, I was giving someone a ride home and they were sharing that their son was autistic. And he was going into, I was asking questions about what that meant and how that affected them. And he said really the hardest thing for him was that he felt like his son might not ever fully understand or realize just how much he loved him. And so it was a personal experience, a father wanting their son to know just how much they cared. But the difficulty in communicating with his young son hindered that. We have coworkers here who have placed brothers, fathers, and children on holds who are in crisis. And those are ones that I know about personally. I have a friend here who is seeing the effects that his brother's mental health struggle has placed on his mom and the strain that that places on their family. We have officers who get off their graveyard shifts to take care of parents with Alzheimer's. We have family members who are addicted to drugs. We have family members who are incarcerated. And it's no surprise when you look at the overall mental health statistics and the prevalence in this country. About 20% of US adults, about 1 in 5 of us struggle with mental illness. 13 million Americans suffer from serious mental illness. So we as officers get to bring all of those experiences apart from work to our work involving crisis intervention. Oftentimes that's where our greatest sense of compassion comes from. So aside from our personal experiences, what type of training do we get? De-escalation training is taught at the academy, and I will get into that in just a little bit. All of our officers get trained in CIT. We send officers, you heard me report on it tonight, to the 40-hour CIT course. I was fortunate enough to go to that years ago. I certainly learned a lot from it. They will tell you that the goal of CIT is really to broaden the scope of understanding and present a more compassionate view of mental illness. It's really that compassion that drives our success in dealing with people who are in crisis. Officers receive CIT and de-escalation as a part of our scenario-based training. And so we may be assigned to go to use of force training, and as a part of that, we will be run through scenarios. We will have role players in those scenarios that will respond to the feedback that we're giving them. So if we are doing the things and hitting the keys in terms of de-escalating with our voice, with our actions, with our words, then the role players will also respond accordingly. We might get more compliance during the role play. Conversely, if the things we were saying would tend to escalate somebody or move in a more escalating fashion, then the role players play up to that as well. Other trainings that we receive that help us deal with people with MH issues would be things like navigating our biases, being aware of those. We get a lot of different trainings that help us in these various situations. In fact, just last week, I was away attending a 36-hour training on assisting individuals in crisis and group crisis intervention. So our department certainly supports us being trained. I'm going to talk in just a little bit about the culture of this department and how it supports us assisting people with crisis. But I'd like to start off by saying, letting you know exactly what is a 5150. Most of us nowadays have heard the term. It comes from the Welfare and Institutions Code that sets out the criteria that someone needs to meet before being placed on a hold. The three areas that determine that are if somebody is a danger to themselves, it's active and intentional and suicidal, things like making threats or gestures or attempts to harm themselves. It can be a danger to others with threats, violence. Sometimes it's setting fires, it's acting out, but articulating that. Or someone who may be gravely disabled. That's more passive and unintentional. It can also be symptoms of mental illness that cause someone to neglect really just their basic survival needs. It's important to note that an officer filling out a 5150 form is not an admission ticket. It's really just an application to be seen by a psychologist or psychiatrist. And it's a way to have, and it's they who have the authority to detain the individual for treatment or simply to release them if they're not a harm. I will show you what the actual form looks like. You'll hear it commonly referred to as a green sheet. It's just one page in triplicate, green on the back. That's how it gets its name. The top portion of it talks about the subject, the location, those types of things. And then the body of the form is the application process. So it's things like how were we made aware of the subject and what situations developed prompting a request for help from the police or medical staff. And then once we were at the situation, what developed requiring intervention. We fill that out, we describe the behaviors or the actions that we're seeing. And then that individual will be taken to a hospital by ambulance. In our county, in our city, generally that means either going to Alta Bates Hospital or John George Psychiatric Pavilion. When I first started, officers were the ones who drive individuals out to John George themselves. That's not the case now. We recognize that there may be medical concerns that might need to be addressed as well. So they're taken out by ambulance to the hospital. I'd like to talk a little bit about what does it look like when somebody is in crisis. Commonly, it can look like somebody walking in and out of traffic. Also commonly, it can look like a teenager who's struggling with depression and cutting themselves, or who's attempted suicide. we've been to a number of those calls, and they're difficult. It's not uncommon for us to respond to a call of a suicidal college student. I mentioned earlier that I'd worked on the county crisis line. I volunteered there a few years after I started working as a negotiator. It was uncomfortable for me. I didn't come from a law enforcement background. It wasn't what I wanted to do as a little kid. So I found it difficult sometimes to talk and ask people who were in crisis or deep depression about what was really going on. So volunteering there was really my way of honing my skills and broadening my horizons and talking to people. And in my time there, I was able to talk to hundreds of people. I learned all sorts of things. I became more comfortable asking hard questions. Commonly, when we're talking with somebody who's in crisis, it's uncomfortable to even say the word suicide. And we will dance sort of around what we're asking them, or we'll soften it. We'll say something like, do you think you might hurt yourself, as opposed to, are you thinking about killing yourself or suicide? You become more comfortable with the fact that talking about suicide is not putting the idea in their heads. And it's not going to cause them to think of something and then go hurt themselves. But I also learned that if you dance around it, in their minds, they can be answering you truthfully when you say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? And they say no. Because in their minds, I've heard feedback that, yeah, I wasn't thinking about hurting myself. I was thinking about ending it all. I was thinking about hurting myself. So my time on the crisis line really helped me build through and learn more, grab more skills that I can bring back to my work here. It also helped me understand the mindset of somebody who's going through that, understanding really just the deep hopelessness and despair that people are going through. I learned that children are at greater risk of suicide if their parents had suicided. At some point in my time there, the VA hospital was having difficulty answering and responding to all the calls from veterans that they were getting. So they contracted out with these different county call centers, and we would get the overflow of those calls. So I had the opportunity to talk with a number of military veterans suffering from PTSD and who were suicidal. Again, some of those calls were very difficult. It's difficult to listen to somebody and their experience and the trauma that they've been through. But again, really just a great learning experience and way to build and show and give back some compassion. In Berkeley, it can also look like somebody who's on the roof of a 6-story building and on the wrong side of the railing threatening to jump. We've had that call. It can look like a number of different things as we're responding to calls here in our city. So how do we respond to people in crisis? It's my opinion that day to day, we do it pretty well. You might not know that our police department has been working side by side with our non-sworn mobile crisis team for the past 40 years. I know that conversation in the Bay Area and nationwide is evolving and getting a greater voice. But we've had the benefit of our mobile crisis team for 40 years. What I just learned recently, just the other day, and I wasn't aware of it, but it was the police department 40 years ago. It was the officers that thought it would be a good idea to have a civilian MH specialist on the streets giving their insight. But I was amazed that that was the actual origin of it. We work really well with our mobile crisis team. I wish we had more. We learn from them on calls. We hear how they respond to people. We hear the questions that they ask. And I'm continually learning about them. The ones that we have are highly skilled. They've been amazing. So we use them. We have a good relationship. It's easy for us to call them out. It's just over our radio. Because we're so comfortable, we do end up using them quite a bit. In this police department, we really do have a culture of allowing officers the time to work with somebody in crisis. And I'm not sure that that's true for every department. And it's an important part. SB 230, I know that you're all aware of it. I'm going to read it, but it speaks specifically to it. It says the highest priority of California law is safeguarding life, the dignity, and liberty of all persons without prejudice to anyone. Law enforcement officers shall be guided by the principle of reverence for human life in all investigative, enforcement, and other contacts between officers and members of the public. When officers are called upon to detain, arrest, or arrest a suspect who is uncooperative or actively resisting, may attentively pose a danger to others or pose a danger to themselves, they should consider tactics and techniques that may persuade the subject to voluntarily comply or mitigate the need to use a higher level of force to resolve the situation safely. So that's important. That's the sanctity of life. It talks about the importance. It makes some demands on us. And in my experience, simply put, it works. So at the heart of that is de-escalation. And de-escalation is pretty key. Our officers understand that de-escalation can enhance our contacts with the public, and it may improve decision-making. It can improve opportunities for more positive contacts with the public. And what it also does is increases voluntary compliance, which is really our goal. De-escalation involves self-control, effective communication, and scene management. Things like the use of time, distance, cover, and concealment, all of those things help assist in de-escalation. And being strategic with our communication enhances exactly what it is we're trying to accomplish. De-escalation has been something that's been prevalent around here for a long time. There's no sort of negative connotation to de-escalation in this building. What it is not, what de-escalation does not mean, it doesn't mean that it's soft policing or that we're losing control. It doesn't mean that we're simply retreating or letting our guard down. But when we use it well, it really does have a positive effect that enhances the trust that the community has in us. When we do it well, it enhances that trust. And when we do it well, it helps us gain more community cooperation in the future. And what I have seen is it has a positive effect on the person in crisis. The end result is that the person in crisis, it's less impactful for them. They're already in a tough spot. When we're able to de-escalate and bring down, reduce, or eliminate the need for uses of force, it certainly is less impactful. I think it's less impactful on an emotional level as well. When we use it, it's also helpful because we will often deal with the same people on multiple occasions. And sometimes our use of de-escalation on one call with one person helps our second or third or fourth encounter with this person because they've seen us go through it. They know that we weren't there simply to hurt them, and it worked. So oftentimes we were dealing with people multiple times, and our use of de-escalation can really make the subsequent contacts with that individual more beneficial. Our officers do take the time needed to resolve the situation. Because of the culture in this department, we would be surprised if somebody went hands-on very quickly. Like, that would be more surprising to a patrol officer than less surprising. In the same vein, in our department, you're not criticized or looked at funny for not using force. What I'm saying is that you're not considered scared if you use time and distance and talking to your advantage. There's not a culture of, oh, we got to move quick, we got to move in. Why were you hesitant to go hands-on? For years, the culture has been that we take that time. It also shows us, in our department, we've got a lot of people who do this very well and effectively. I feel like I've had some good success in this area, but there have been plenty of times where I was not getting through, and another officer will come up to me and say, hey, can I take a shot at it? And they end up connecting with the individual and resolving it successfully. There was one time we were dealing with an individual who was naked, who was a veteran, who was addled by drugs and suffering from both traumatic brain injury and PTSD. And I talked to him for a while and wasn't really making any process. Another officer came. He too was a veteran, and they ended up connecting. They connected over common military experiences, over using the same terminology, and ultimately ended up resolving that without the individual getting hurt or force being used. I remember sitting down and the officer and the gentleman had a pretty good conversation as they sat on a bench up there on Shattuck, waiting for the ambulance. I know you're probably aware of our bike force. We have an officer on our bike force who is gifted with being able to calm people down and people who are agitated, who are in crisis. She has a way of reaching people. Her assignment also places her in the position to do that quite a bit. What other officers do is they recognize that. They're willing to ask for her. They want to get her skills to a particular scene. So there's not much of an ego involved when we're doing this. We're kind of on the same page in trying to resolve it successfully. Our department also values the skills, which is evident by the resources they put into our trained negotiators. I think right now we have about 12 trained special response team negotiators who are trained in CIP and crisis negotiations. So that means that we can usually have at least one of them on duty and available when we need them. Our SRT negotiators, it's an ancillary job. So some are working in patrol, some are working in other assignments like detectives. They're on the radio. Oftentimes we'll see that they will self-dispatch themselves when they hear a call come out that they think their skills can be used at. At other times, in other situations, we will call them in to be used to come talk to somebody. But our department invests quite a bit in that resource into the training. There's costs associated with it, but it's a valuable resource that they give us to deploy when we're having tough times reaching somebody. Sometimes when we're talking to somebody, there are just barriers to fostering good communication. That can be a language barrier. It could be something physical that's in the way, or you're in a location that can be loud and difficult to hear. I'm often aware that my uniform and the things that I am wearing on it can be a barrier to building that rapport. It's something that I'm keenly aware of. But there are ways to minimize that barrier. They see the uniform for sure, and people have different reactions to it. But with body language, with the tone of our voice, conveying sincerity and compassion, with the words that we're actually saying, it can go a long way to break down barriers. And I can tell you the uniform is not always a hindrance. Just a few weeks ago, an officer on one of my teams was dealing with a 12 or 13-year-old young boy who was in crisis, who had expressed suicidal and homicidal thoughts. It took a long time to reach that child and get him the help. But ultimately, to me, I was taken back by the sight of this giant officer who played football, who has tattoos, who's in uniform, kneeling down, bending over, seeing eye to eye with a skinny 12-year-old shirtless little boy who's in crisis. So it's not always a barrier that is insurmountable. Our officers also get quite a lot of opportunity to practice their skills. By that, I mean, I believe you could take any one of our officers with 2 years of experience here in this city and place them in most departments in this city and in the state, and they would probably have the most experience in the department with dealing with people in crisis. It is a daily call that we go to somebody who is acting out, has a stick, a bar, branch, hitting cars, distraught, and excited. And, our officers go to that daily and resolve the situation overwhelmingly in a positive way, without the need for force. We know that if we can reduce the level of an individual's excitedness, and that opens up the possibility for discussion. If we get them calmed down to the point where they're able to communicate what has them upset, then that opens the door for us to come in and work with that individual and get them the help that they need. We're always trying to slow things down. It gives us time. We will purposely talk at a level and in a tone lower than where they're at. I've really found that when somebody's up here and I can talk to them down here, it's more human nature for them to bring themselves down so that they can understand what it is I'm trying to say. And usually what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to understand you. So we'll often slow things down and calm things down with our voice. We're trying to gather information. So what is it that has this person upset so we can address it? We'll do things like we'll reflect what it is they're telling us. And believe me, this is true. So if I'm dealing with an individual and I tell somebody, I tell them, it seems I'm getting the feeling that you're mad about this. If I get it right and they are mad about what it is I said, they will let me know that. They'll say, yes, I'm mad because this person won't do whatever. If I get it wrong, it's also a bonus, because if I get it wrong, they'll correct me. No, I'm not mad about this person. I am agitated because I haven't had lunch or whatever it is. But once you get to that level, they're responding back and they're self-reflecting what it is they're actually feeling. We also try and and get additional resources where possible. Things like mobile crisis, the negotiators, BFD. We'll try and get the resources there to the scene. And there are also some truths that when we're dealing with people in crisis that we know. I mean, it hits true to me when I see them, but we know that everybody wants to be treated with dignity and respect. And so when we do that, we're helping foster that communication. You know, everybody wants to be asked and not told to do something. I can ask somebody to do it and get their compliance. I get better compliance than when I just tell somebody what to do. Everybody wants to know why it is they're being asked to do it. So if I can explain to somebody, hey, I would like you to sit down, or I need you to drop that branch, I'm happy to explain to them why it is I'm asking them to do what I'm asking them to do. People would like to be given options and not threats. I've never found threatening things as a good way to get people's compliance. Most people want a second chance as well. Lastly, I want to kind of point out that dealing with people who are going through crisis, it can be quite complex. So the symptoms that we see in drug use, mental health, developmental issues, traumatic brain injury, physiological issues, excited delirium, or a combination of those can oftentimes express themselves in very similar ways. It can be hard to try and narrow down what it is that's driving the issue with that individual, whether it's developmental or somebody that's used drugs. To a great degree, it doesn't always matter. It does matter in how we can help people, but the de-escalation tactics that I talked about oftentimes will work across those different symptomatic causes. I am told by doctors and MH professionals, even after seeing patients, that can be very difficult for them to diagnose exactly what's going on. But it doesn't necessarily change the approach. We will make the attempt to de-escalate regardless of what the underlying thing is. The one exception, not to de-escalation, but the excited delirium does have some other components to it, and it's really a need for us to get that person to a medical professional as quickly as we can. But we're certainly always trying to treat people with the compassion and respect, with the idea of maintaining their dignity throughout the whole process and interaction with us. In my 21 years as a Berkeley police officer, I'm really proud of how we interact with people in crisis. I'm proud of the hearts of our officers for helping other people. I'm really honored to be a small part of that. I do enjoy the fact that our department is constantly looking to improve, looking for areas where we can do this better. We don't get it perfect every time, I know that, but we certainly do get it right quite a bit. And it's one of the reasons that I have stayed with this department. And so with that, I will ask if there's any questions. I do appreciate you all taking the time.
Thanks. So if anybody has questions, raise hand icon and then I can keep people in order. Okay, not seeing any questions. So thank you, Lieutenant Rittenhouse. That was very helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is closed session. So what I was going to ask, we didn't make this change in the agenda, but was going to ask if we could suspend the rules to hold public comment now. Is there any objection to that? To hold public comment before we go into closed session?
No.
Okay, Great. So not seeing any objections to that, we are going to do public comment. So 1 second, I'm going to share my screen. Timer going. All right, we have at least one person who's raised their hand for public comment, and that is Emily R., who I'm allowing to talk now. So whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I just had a quick process question maybe someone could address because I haven't been in this situation before, but there's closed session and I believe that's on the same Zoom link. And I know you had kind of in a prior meeting asked us to leave if we weren't part of that. But then after closed session, there's like announcement of closed session action. And then theoretically another public comment, probably not tonight, but I guess I'm just trying to figure out if it's all the same Zoom link, how would people know whether to come back to hear what the reported action was? And maybe someone can explain that, or maybe I misunderstand how it works entirely, but thank you for an interesting discussion tonight again.
Thanks. All right, let's see if there are any other questions, comments. I'm not seeing any other raised hands. So if you'd like to speak, please use the raise hand icon or hit *9. Okay, so with that, yeah, I mean, it's a good question that Emily R. has raised. So I mean, we'll have to address how we can notify people to come back. It is the same. Maybe we'll see if we can alter the procedure or do something going forward. But you're right. Right now, it's the same one, and so someone would have to know to call in when we finish, and that's so it would be mighty fortuitous to time that right. So we'll have to try to address that issue. Thanks for raising it. Going forward. So okay. But that being said, we do have Zoom in closed session that we're going into now. So like I said, next time we'll try to figure out that issue. But I think as of tonight, we're going to have the same process, which obviously is, as you pointed out, is not ideal. So I don't think we have any other options tonight. Okay. So with that, with no further public comment right now, would ask that anyone who's not involved in the closed session matters, please remove themselves from the Zoom. So perhaps we can deal with it in the future, but perhaps in the future we can set up a breakout room or something that would separate people.
Yeah, I'm not sure. We'll have to think about that. Chair, I just wanted to let you know that Mr. Stein is here for closed session.
Okay. All right. So attendees, we have Mr. Stein. I'm promoting you to panelist. Okay, we have Rivka Palatnik, who I assume is not here for closed session. So I would ask Ms. Palatnik that you leave the session or we'll have to remove you. And then also Pam White. Would ask that Ms. White remove yourself. You could hit your raised hand icon if you are actually supposed to be here for closed session. Well, I'll allow Ms. White to talk real quickly just to confirm this. Okay, it says that she's using an older version of Zoom, so I can't give her the ability to talk. Okay. So are we sure that Ms. White's not related to the closed session?
I do not believe that she is. You couldn't allow her to talk? Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
But up here, I do see her. Oh, no, I thought I saw a raised hand, but I didn't. Okay. What?
Oh, she did.
She is, yeah. So give me.
She did raise her hand.
Give me a second. I'm going to promote her to panelist and allow her to talk. So, Ms. White?
Yeah, actually, I don't know what happened.
I
Okay.
didn't hit that to talk, so I don't know what happened here.
Okay, are you here for the closed session?
No, I'm not. I'm with the League of Women Voters and I was listening to you guys before the closed session.
Okay, thanks very much. We are entering closed session now, so
Okay.
we have to ask that you
I
leave
will,
the meeting at this point, if that's all right.
thank you. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, and Ms. Plotnick, I'm going to remove her. I know she's not here for the closed session.
Right.
Okay,
Okay, I'm gonna pause the recording. And then I need to lock the webinar. Okay, webinar's locked. I guess I better